Could you describe the most significant experiences you've had during the dives?
Yes. So the one experience that I already spoke about a little bit, where I was able to use the lunar breath during a dive to feel the ability to breathe through liquid, like being a fish with gills, was very significant, and that is one of my most memorable continuum experiences. But there have been so many, and sometimes they're very small or short, meaning in time moments. So it could even be a few moments, but the depth of what happens feels like it could span many lifetimes. Um, and there have been many of those, and many points where something changes in my system that then I'm different from that point on. So it never can quite go back or goes back to what it was before. And there's been many times like this that I can think of and feel into even today in my system. But there is one other time. Gosh, there's so many. So it's hard. It's hard to give what feels like a complete answer. But I will just share. There was another time where we were in a time of silence at Omega. We all entered in silence, and we were just working with dives that have already been laid out. And there was this towards maybe towards the end of where we were, what we were working with, or the time period that we had before we were exiting the space again in silence. I dropped into some depth of being. It was like dark and undefined and forever. And this is one of those experiences I shared a little bit about before, where it was a moment of where I was being breathed. And it was not like this body was being breathed, it was like existence was being breathed. Existence was being moved. And after that, after sort of transitioning out of that space, even, I noticed that my body was moving, my body was transitioning back into walking back to my cabin, or, but there was a part of me that was staying within that depth of existence, just being whatever it was that was being, a place that stayed in that darkness, a place, and darkness as in comfort even. So there was a part of me that stayed. And that is also that time when one of the other continuum teachers who was there at that moment kind of leaned over after and just whispered, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And it eventually led to me developing a breath around this experience. But it was significant, one of the very significant experiences in a dive for me.
And I'd love to talk more about that later and the breath that you developed that derived, it sounds like, from this experience. And when you said a part of you stayed, I wonder, so in what ways did that, or might that have altered your perception or experience or understanding, having, touched this place, this darkness, this comfort, this forever
Mm-hmm.
existence?
I feel like, I mean, it's interesting because just talking about it, I can feel back into it. So it's still alive. It's still here, even though I might not be aware of it in my everyday. But yes, that experience of it's like there's a part of me that could never fully rebuy into the idea that this is all I am, or even planetary, that this is all we are. It's like a back door opened inside of me, or I don't even know that it's accurate to say inside of me, but some back door opened. And the the experience is that there's more. And that what I want to say is that what I thought myself to be will never be complete again. But I don't know that that quite names it, um, because it sounds to me kind of when I say that like a maybe not such a positive thing. And I don't know, positive, negative, who knows? It just is a thing. Um, I don't know that that completely describes the experience, but that there's a part of me that operates as Kori. And there's this awareness that there's more
And
simultaneously, that they don't exclude each other. I think that feels important to say.
and is that more something different to the divinity that you were speaking about earlier, or is it similar or something different quality that you're speaking to here, or part of it?
To me, it feels like a bit of a different quality because when I feel like meeting and knowing what I'm talking about is divinity, which could also be named as like capital L love, that I feel like the pulse of life in that. I feel movement in that. I feel, and I don't know that that's an accurate description of what everybody would name as divinity or love, but that's what I feel. I feel kind of like Shakti energy, that energy that is all things, runs through and is all things. And this felt more like this. I keep referencing behind because that's kind of what it feels more like an absence or and that's totally fine. A comfort in absence, or not even comfort isn't even the right word because there's not um a just it's like an isness without the isness. I don't know. It's hard to speak about, but it does feel different to me. And it feels almost like I can't, part of the reason it's hard to speak about is kind of like I can't grasp it or name it with the mind. But there was this felt experience. And maybe it's something of like what people sometimes refer to as the void. I don't I don't really know because to me the void I get this other sensation. I'm a very sensational person if you can't tell. That's sort of how I know things is how they feel. Um and this feels like it like almost beyond that. Like almost beyond the pulse of life or love or divinity. Like dropping into something else.
And are there any other experiences that you've had during the dives that you'd really like to talk about?
It's funny because so often I will come out with these new insights or these things and I write in my journal or if I'm in a place where it's appropriate to express, I might share with others. And it's amazing to me, there's always um, So it's funny that right now I'm not feeling like naming a particular piece. But the one thing I will say is that um, it's interesting to me, even sometimes how what my mind will go, or I can be thinking about something. There's a part of me that, really heeds Emily's words around stay the course. And I notice that when I just stay in the dive, even if it's that I check out somehow with the mind or something else, and then I have the intention, I return to it, re-entering in through sound, re-entering in through my attention. It's always amazing to me how it continues to work. Even so, what I mean by that is it can the experience continues whether I'm fully in it or not. And sometimes I'm just doing what it takes to move through the motions of the dive. That happens for me sometimes where it's like I'm not super deep in, but I'm just doing it. And sometimes that's a first layer, and then that opens up to a second layer of deepening in. But even those times when I'm just moving through the motions, just to be with the dive for the sake of I committed to this, I'm doing it. Then sometimes it's in the after or the end, the open attention or a closing baseline where it's like, oh, all of this is here now for me to experience, or some amazing, revelation or some new thing that emerges that I wasn't even conscious of, but I had committed to staying the course. I had committed to being with the dive and seeing what happens. And so I guess what I'm saying is sometimes it's in the afterwards or the collecting after the experience that I really know the depth of what has been moved versus being in that. And sometimes that stays from just staying the course, even if I'm not really curious and interested in what's happening in the moment. And I do remember, Emily saying, you just got to get curious. You just got to get curious about it. And so I hear that sometimes too when I'm not so deeply curious or involved. It's like, oh, well, there's the option to just be curious and deepen and stay.
And I'm wondering what you do with that. And I imagine it changes at different times. But if you're, say, not so deep in and not that curious, but do you have any, I don't know, techniques or strategies or thoughts or something that can help direct that curiosity to make you more curious, to get more into it? Or do you tend to think, okay, I'm not that curious now and leave it alone? How do you work with being curious?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I would say it's a little combination of both. So one technique, I guess you could say maybe that I use is that if I've committed to a particular dive or a particular period of time, I commit and I commit to, maybe it's not going through the whole thing. If I find a different rabbit hole that I want to go down, I might do that. But I commit to be there. And even if I'm not super involved and in deep, I honor that commitment for a certain time period. And if by the end of that time period, I'm still not interested or as interested in that particular exploration, then I might give myself permission to go do something else. So that's one piece. And many times I find once I'm in, then I am automatically kind of more curious at some level. Another thing I do sometimes is I might just pause and open myself to open attention. And just taking the time, and this I use in the rest of my life. I mean, this is not unique to just Continuum. I think open attention is one of the most important skills we can develop, especially if you have a body that's challenged in any way, shape, or form, which is many of us. But this open attention, just taking the time to check in and see what's here right now. So, in regards to the dive, the way this can help me to get more engaged is I open myself up beyond the particular motif or the sound or the layout that we might be working with and just notice what's here now, what's happening. And then that might spark my curiosity to go in a different way or from a different angle, or even be curious about resistance if that's what I'm feeling. And then the third thing is really around sound. So, and I kind of touched on this a bit before, but sound to me has been such an incredible tool at redirecting my mind. So if I feel like I'm not, maybe I'm floating off into other things, I'm less interested in the particular motif that we're diving into, I'll just put sound in intentionally to a place and pay attention to that. And that has a way of redirecting me, kind of redrawing me in. But I do find sometimes I need breaks. Sometimes it's not kind of the right thing for me in that moment. Getting out into the natural world is hugely important. That re-sparks my curiosity for life in general. And also, I guess the last thing that's kind of just coming to mind is experimenting with movement. So the micro movements, as I named, are a great example of that. But if I find I'm just not interested, I'm not feeling curious, one thing that almost always for sure that can get my attention, can bring me in, is noticing or inviting some micro movements in some part of my body. Because to really follow that and be with it, you kind of have to. It's so that can be a great tool too, to re-engage if I feel like I'm not here so much for the dive.